Okay, it is 2 p.m. and we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the second webinar in the series entitled Throwing Away the Menu, Improving Sexual Assault Services for Survivors and Agencies. My name is Erica Blackwood, and I am the Sadie Specialist for NC CASA. And our focus in this series is to help those serving sexual assault survivors across the state to improve their sexual assault services by reimagining the menu of services agencies currently provide. The goal is to help agencies with their leadership and staff to create accessible, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed approaches to the unique needs survivors are facing. So before we get started with today's webinar, Meaningful Services for Survivors, Part 1, just a few housekeeping items. All webinars are recorded and will be available on NC CASA's YouTube page afterwards. Certificates will be available at the end of the entire series, and our training specialist, Alexandra Smith, will be handling that distribution. You can reach out to her. I will put that information in the chat at training at NC CASA or Alexandra at NC CASA. I'll put both of those in the chat. We are hosting today's meeting. Hosting today's webinar in a meeting format. So if you have questions, you can use the chat to ask a question or raise your hand, and we will acknowledge when the presenters are ready for questions. Also, please be mindful of taking care of yourself first. I am so thankful that you all are joining us today, but we do understand that this is a moment of active trauma that we are all collectively a part of. And so if you need to step away, please do so. Or if you need additional assistance, you can message any of us facilitators privately. Today, we have the honor of having Valerie Davis from Elevate Uplift Team back, and she is joined today by Leah Green. Their organization is built on the foundation of lessons learned from the Sexual Assault Demonstration Initiative, which was a multi-year national project that helped community-based organizations strengthen services for survivors of sexual violence. So Elevate Uplift deepens and broadens that work by offering survivors serving organizations the opportunity to explore these lessons learned. So I will now turn it over to Valerie Davis and Leah Green to talk more about their work, introduce themselves if they would like, and get us started. So over to you, Val and Leah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you all for joining us today. So Leah and I love talking about services for survivors of sexual violence. And as Erica shared, both Leah and I work for the Resource Sharing Project, like Tracy and Monica do, but we work for Iowa CASA. And I worked specifically on the Sexual Assault Demonstration Initiative, and then work on the Elevate Uplift project. And as Leah introduces herself, we would love it if you all would introduce yourselves in the chat and say your name and where you're from in North Carolina, but then also as a way to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous land in which we are all on. You also name the Indigenous land that you are inhabiting. And if you do not know, there's a number that you can text, and I'll put it in the chat as well, but it's 907-312-5085. Text your zip code to that number, and they'll send you right back a text with the Indigenous land that you are on. And so I'll put that number in the chat. And then, Leah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Leah Green. I work for the Resource Sharing Project on all of our rural focused work. So I'm our Rural Technical Assistance Specialist. So I get the opportunity to work on our rural OVW grant. So really I help all programs that are considered rural across the country navigate stronger sexual assault services. And I'm also working on an OVC grant that is focused specifically on helping rural programs better understand the needs of adult survivors of child sexual abuse and to create services with adult survivors of child sexual abuse in mind. So I get the joy of really just getting to talk about and learn about and be with rural folks all day at the Resource Sharing Project.
Thanks, Leah. So today, like Erica shared, Leah and I are here to talk about building meaningful services for survivors of sexual violence and really exploring what we mean by meaningful services, as I always use that word. Oftentimes you might also see comprehensive services. But again, our webinar or conversation today, our dialogue, feel free to, again, put any questions that you have in the chat or unmute yourself and ask us, because we are really just engaging in a conversation is how we really want to have our time together. So that would mean Leah and I talking to each other, of course, but also really wanting to be in conversation with you. And as Erica shared, our conversation today is really rooted in the lessons from the Sexual Assault Demonstration Initiative. And as Erica shared, that was a national, like more than 10-year project where we worked with 6 sites across the country for almost 5 years on really identifying what are some of the challenges that they experience in reaching and having really meaningful services for survivors of sexual violence. What are those organizational changes that need to be in place in order to create the organization in order to provide meaningful services to survivors of sexual violence, and identifying those things that work. And so over that course of working really intensely with those programs, we came up with what we call the Sadie Lessons, which I'm sure many of you have probably seen. Erica has probably sent that out or talked to you about that. But if not, we can always share all the lessons with you. And today, really the lesson that we're primarily highlighting, although they all work in partnership with each other. Every lesson builds on and needs all the other lessons in order for it really to come together and come to fruition. But the lesson that we're focusing mostly on today is that programs need to offer services that are meaningful and relevant to survivors of sexual violence. And one of the ways that this lesson was identified was when we were talking with programs and saying like, oh, we're going to create comprehensive services, or we're going to help you create meaningful services. What do you think? What are some of the services that you want? And really, programs, even though they had been, many of them, providing services for survivors of sexual violence for many, many years, just really didn't have a good answer for that. They couldn't envision what that meant. And I know when I came on as a TA provider for the Sadie, I had the very same question. My roots are in dual multi-service work. I worked for a program for 15 years. And when I was told my job was going to be to help dual and multi-service programs create comprehensive services, I was sort of like, okay, but what does that mean? What do we mean by, because I don't really know, so how am I going to help programs? And so one of the things that we did was we created this document where we two sort of documents where one, we explored what states and territories sort of identified through their program standards, whether that was something that the coalition set or that the state or territorial funder set, but what are those maybe written in legislation, core services that are identified? And then what are the additions to those core services that need to be had in order to make these comprehensive or meaningful services? And so that's sort of where we started back in 2010 or so, was exploring that sort of question and what that meant. And then as we continued to work with project sites on that, we've sort of shifted and moved away from labeling services core or comprehensive. And again, Val likes to use the term meaningful. And because it really is about services that are rooted in meeting the healing needs of survivors. And since not all services are relevant or meaningful to when we think about survivors in the full continuum of who experiences sexual violence, and when we think about the impacts of sexual violence across someone's lifetime and throughout their healing journey, that's really what we mean by meaningful services. And so since not all services are relevant to all survivors, it's very challenging for us to say these are the services that every program has to have, right? Because maybe lots of states, lots of the states have maybe in their legislation, like I said, or membership standards that you have to have a 24-hour hotline. Well, for many programs that perhaps serve culturally specific populations, youth as well, a hotline just really might not be relevant to them. And there's more there's different services that would better meet their needs. And so why put the time, energy, and money into a service that really isn't meeting the population of survivors that you're trying to serve? And one of the challenges that we identified was one of the reasons why programs really weren't being able to name or dream or think about what services could meet those healing needs of survivors, is that we didn't really have a really good foundational understanding of what the impact of sexual violence is on survivors, again, throughout their lifetime and throughout the healing journey. We are so trained, and throughout the entire field, whether it's a dual program or a multi-service program or a standalone program, really crafted services based on meeting the immediate medical and criminal legal needs of survivors who choose to use those services, right? That's what so much of our field has created services for. And that leaves out the vast majority of survivors because they don't use those services, they don't use those systems, or they're adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And so they're 40 years old and experienced sexual violence as a child. And so those medical and legal systems aren't really an option for them. And so programs can and should develop services to meet their needs. And so that's one of that we just explored that lesson and named it, that we really need to work on building those services that meet the healing needs of survivors. And so Leah, one of the things that I think that we should start with is helping to gain a foundation of the impact of sexual violence on folks and throughout the lifetime, throughout the healing journey, and that really our services need to be shaped by survivors' experiences. And so would you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So much of what you said, Val, resonates with me in my experience. Before coming to work at the Resource Sharing Project, I worked for 3 different advocacy programs across the state of Iowa. Um, and and those words that you shared, meaningful and relevant services for sexual assault survivors, like, whoa, that feels like such a big, scary phrase. And when I was an advocate, I felt like I did not have good answers to what meaningful and relevant services for sexual assault survivors are, which I think is maybe particularly interesting because I identify as a survivor and I still didn't have a really broad or unique answer to the question of sort of what are meaningful services, because I think sort of so much of what you said about our whole field sort of deep focus on the criminal legal system really has took away my ability to be sort of creative and expansive and curious when it comes to services. And so in more recent years and working at the Resource Sharing Project, I feel like I have a really deep understanding of what that means now. But when I was an advocate, it would have been an incredibly difficult question for me to answer. And so recently, this is how I've come to think about services for survivors is really, and the project that I shared that's specifically about the needs of adult survivors of child sexual abuse, it's how we've started talking about it in that project, is that for you to come up with this, what should our services be? What should we be providing the community? It's sort of a math problem to me, which is sort of like, if you understand the impact that sexual violence has had on survivors, if you understand the life experience and the experiences that those survivors have had, so if you understand that impact and those experiences, plus understanding sort of what does healing look like, what does that encompass, what are the possibilities, then A plus B equals C. Like, you have the answer to what services should look like. If you understand survivors' experiences and you know what healing looks like, which we'll talk about a little bit today, and we'll talk really in depth in the last webinar in this series that I'm doing with Mira Youssef, then you really have kind of all the information that you need to know for how to create the services that you want to create for survivors, which I think hopefully makes it a little bit less scary. It's quantifiable information that you can get. And so when I think about meaningful and relevant services, and I think about the impact of sexual violence on survivors' lives, I think that's sort of where you want to look first. What are the lives of sexual violence survivors like, and how has that impacted their life? And something that we know is that it deeply impacts every facet of a survivor's life. Their physical health, their mental health, their connection to spirit and spirituality, their ability to build relationships and community are all areas that are sort of deeply impacted by sexual violence. And so our services should, of course, address all those areas. One that I'm really passionate about, and so it sort of springs to mind easily, is the areas in which survivors' lives are impacted when it comes to their physical health. A lot of what you shared, Val, is that, we're really good as a movement at helping people navigate their physical health needs immediately after sexual violence. I think that's something that we can pat ourselves on the back and say we're really good at. For the most part, rural communities still deeply struggle with that, but like, we are committed and we're trying really hard, right? But it was sort of mind-blowing to me when I came to the Resource Sharing Project and was sort of invited to imagine the possibility of thinking about what a survivor's physical health could look like long-term in their life. And not just immediately after the violence, but the ways that their physical health can be impacted, particularly when we're talking about child sexual abuse survivors. We're talking about really sort of lifelong health problems associated with the trauma itself. The way that the trauma and the stress impacts your body long term can lead to a lot of autoimmune disorders, migraines, fibromyalgia, complications with pregnancy and conceiving. Are all just a few of the really long-term complex problems that survivors have. And I think maybe most disturbing of all is that the research also suggests that whether, no matter what physical health problem you might have as a result of your child sexual abuse, that you will actually experience pain more pain associated with that than someone that's not a survivor. So it's not just that we have more complex health problems, but they're physically more painful for us than someone that has not experienced that child sexual abuse or that sexual violence. And so there's so much there just connected to the violence. But then when you also consider that so many survivors, avoid preventative healthcare measures because the healthcare system and navigating doctors and dentists and gynecologists is really triggering. It can be really scary. It can be really complicated. It makes sense that survivors avoid those feelings, avoid those experiences, and can, as a result, have even more complicated long-term health problems as a result of that. And so that's just sort of one facet of so many of survivors' lives that can be really deeply impacted by the sexual violence. So that's, I think, a really good example of thinking about, what is the impact around a survivor's physical health to their life? And now that we know that it's not just sort of an immediate aftermath after the violence, but that there is a really long-term health consequences for years and decades after sexual violence, and for a lot of survivors, health complications that have no end, that you cannot simply fix, that they are ongoing health consequences that need to be managed throughout a lifetime, that tells us something about where our services could or should be. I think also, in addition to sort of physical health, there's so much about relationship building and community building that is impacted by sexual violence. Sexual violence at its root is really designed to sort of disconnect us from ourselves and disconnect us from our communities and our support systems, to have silence really ingrained in our lives, isolation and silence. And so the ways that sexual violence also disrupts our concepts of trust and safety and love and boundaries and communication and like power and control. It can impact so many areas that are deeply necessary for building community and building relationships. And so community and relationship building can become deeply impacted. And so many survivors that I work with or know in my personal life, or come in contact with doing this work, tell me that they're deeply isolated from their community. They don't feel like they can have sort of open, honest conversations with everyone in their lives. They don't know how to build a truly trusting relationship with another human being. And that when they try, often it's stunted and it fails and they're not sure what they're doing wrong. And there's so many ways that sexual violence impacts areas of our life that are just not always so easy to name, the way that physical health can sometimes be a really obvious, easy to point at consequence of sexual violence. When we're talking about relationship building, we're talking about really like a complicated, murky concepts that it's hard to put into words, but that we hear over and over and over from survivors are deeply impacted. Those are just the first couple of things that kind of come to mind, but I mean, there's just truly so many areas of our life that are impacted. I don't know, Val, if you have a couple that you want to pinpoint. We literally can't name them all because we'd be here all day. But if there's a couple that maybe you're really passionate about or you want to bring to the table.
I had a couple of different thoughts in my head. Okay, more than a couple, because you know me, it's like I go off in a million different directions. So I'm going to first, again, like I did last time, acknowledge that I forgot to mention on our Elevate Uplift team our other partners. In addition to the resource sharing project, our partners are also the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, the National Organizations of Asian and Pacific Islanders Ending Sexual Violence, and then the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And actually in 2 weeks, you're going to meet two of our partners, Guadalupe Lopez from USAC and Mira Youssef from NAPISEV, and they're going to talk more about traits of an effective advocate and some of those skills that are really important to have in our advocacy practice with working with survivors of sexual violence. But one of our other colleagues that we work with is Olga Trujillo. Trujillo. I think I'm saying her name right now. So Olga talks about having her superpower. And so I often think about my superpower, but my superpower often gets in the way. So when you're talking about relationships, Leah, and physical health and this connection, right? Sexual violence at its very core is designed to disconnect us, right? As you said, disconnect us from ourselves and from each other. And so at the root, when I think about what healing services really would want to look like, and I know you and Mira are going to explore that even in more depth in one of the next sessions. But that is the very foundation for meaningful services, is helping survivors reconnect with themselves and with others. Because again, one of the biggest impacts of sexual violence is we as survivors lose the trust in ourselves, which then impacts, right, what you were saying, Leah, trust, being able to be in relationship with each other. And so my superpower is the ability to disconnect, right? So as we experience sexual violence, or as I experienced sexual violence, the way that my body, the way that my brain helped to keep me safe during those experiences was to disconnect, right? And that was really important for me. But that creates problems throughout my life when I feel stressed or overwhelmed or joyful, right? I disconnect. So that means you don't just get to disconnect one emotion or one fear. It's not like, oh, I'm going to disconnect so I don't have my fear anymore. That means I don't have real emotion for joy or happiness or sadness either, right? And so services that, if programs provided services to help me connect, so help me feel my body, help me, because again, one of the defaults that programs often go to help survivors beyond a hotline or accompaniment for an evidence collection exam or accompaniment within the criminal legal system is therapy. And most therapy is based in being able to cognitively process your thoughts, feelings, and experiences, right? And so it's not really addressing the trauma that lives in our body or helping us build that mind-body connection. And I know for me, I can't cognitively process what I'm feeling. I can't name my feelings unless I'm connected, right? And so having those services, the body work services, whether it's massage, whether it's Reiki, whether it's walking, running, breathing, anything that helps me and reminds me to be in my body and to really be present, right? Because you can't be present. We can't even be present right now on this webinar, in our work with other survivors, if we're not connected to ourselves. And so to me, like, that is just one of the basic foundations for meaningful services, is things that help us be connected to ourselves. So Leah, do you want to talk any more about that, or about like what healing looks like, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've spent some time talking about the impact. Once again, there's just so many impacts that we can't possibly get to them all. But I mean, you all work with survivors, you know all the areas of life that are impacted for survivors. So then to me, the next part of my personal equation is then to look at, what does healing look like? Because I think for me, when I was an advocate, I felt like healing was often left out of the conversation. When I was taught, when I went through training, when I was certified, when I'm in staff meetings, when I'm kind of implicitly and explicitly told like what my role is and what my job is, no one really ever said the words healing from sexual violence. which left me to come up with what I thought my role was outside of that. And so I think so often for so many of us in the work, then the way that our programs are often set up is then we feel like our role is to help people go through the criminal legal system. And like Val said, that just isn't as many people in our community as we want to be serving. That the criminal legal system is really set up to only serve the most privileged survivors in our communities. And even those survivors, when they go through the criminal legal system, they get to the end of the process and are like, well, now I still have to live the rest of my life. Even if I was heard by my community and the person that harmed me was held accountable, that can be healing for us, but it can't heal every facet of our lives or make it so that this didn't happen to us anymore, right? And so we still have, I think, a lot of areas of our lives that need to be healed. And so it was a really new, radical concept to me to think of my role as an advocate as to help people heal from sexual violence. And that means whoever's in front of me that day, whoever I get the joy of talking with, like they get to decide what healing means for them. And if that means navigating the criminal legal system, great, I know how to do that. But if that means anything beyond that, I might be a little worried that I don't know how to do that. So thinking about healing as whatever it is the person in front of me is needing to navigate in their life. And I think a lot of that is taking the power and the control back in their lives, making it feel as though they have choice and decisions that they can make about their own lives. For so many, it is navigating, building community, building relationships, navigating your physical health, figuring out how to navigate spirituality and faith communities again, especially when those are so often harmed by sexual violence, right? And so it's different for every unique person in front of you, but that's kind of the joy, I think. Once I started to look at my work that way, it became an exciting new puzzle to be with another person in front of me and learn about who they were as a person and what brought them joy and what they struggled with and what their goals were and all the facets of their life experience that were in this giant tangled ball of yarn in front of us that we were going to try to work together to figure out how to navigate. But I think, you know, so it's unique and individual for each person. But I think often that what we find when working with people is that there's some overlapping concepts that work for a lot of different people. And so I think I'm going to go right back to building community and building relationships, I think is one that's really, really important. It's one that we hear from survivors is really important. And it's one that we, when we look at studies of what is healing, it are repeatedly pointed to. And so it's one of the few cases where the empirical data and what we hear from survivors, they agree that building relationships and building community is really important. And so I think what's really interesting is then to think about what does that mean for services. And so once again, it's this like personal equation I have that like if navigating relationships has been impacted and building relationships is what's healing, then like what does that mean for our services? How can our services naturally be set up to connect survivors to support systems inside our own organizations, things like support groups, or building connections with community members, helping the community build more methods and opportunities for connection regardless of survivorship, right? Because community is good for everybody. How do we as an advocate help someone navigate the components that we know go into relationship building, like building trust and safety and boundaries? How can I help the person in front of me relearn how to put up boundaries, maybe for the first time in their life, so that they can go out into the world and build relationships that work for them? So that's, you know, one facet. Or thinking about, you know, the impact we talked about earlier about physical health. If we know an impact of sexual violence is that physical health is often impacted long into the future. And something that's really healing for a lot of survivors is to take back their power and their choice, then something that's really healing is like, let's talk through the health concerns that you have and how you're going to navigate the healthcare industry. How can we set you up to be the most confident and equipped to create boundaries with your doctor, or to talk through appointments so you feel more confident? Go with you to health appointments where you feel unsure how to navigate them by yourself, right? So thinking about our services is more expansive, because what is healing for each person is individual. And so what you get to do is sit with that person in front of you and figure out what feels healing to them, instead of thinking about services as going through the criminal legal system, where the process is not set up by survivors and their needs are often not really considered. That's what comes to mind for me. What about you guys?
Yeah. One of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking is one of the challenges, I think, for advocates, especially advocates in dual and multi-service programs, to adopt sort of like that mindset, because it feels very different and very intangible, right? To an advocate who's really designed the program itself, and advocates designing their jobs around meeting tangible needs of domestic violence survivors, right? So we need to get them safe shelter. We need to help them with a protective order. We need to help them get housing. We need to help them get food, right? All these very like specific like benchmarks and roles and clear cut. In some, there's lots of other things domestic violence survivors need, but that's not for today. But that's sort of how we've structured this work. And so that's sort of then why sexual assault services have often been structured that way too, especially in dual and multi-service programs, is we're trying to get a survivor somewhere, right? We need to get them to physical safety. We need to get them wherever, right? And we need to get them to healing? What? Like, why? That's just sort of like a concept that like healing isn't this end point. Like there's no like, I'm working to get survivor to this thing, right? It's about just being there and supporting them, identifying their healing needs, and then helping them access those healing needs, right? And so one of the healing needs that often, again, isn't addressed by programs and is such an area for growth is around healing our spiritual selves, right? And so sexual violence impacts many parts of our lives, like we've been talking about, and our spirituality is one of those areas. And so that's often like an area where it's like sort of taboos, like we don't get into religion. Maybe some programs are designed around religious practices and really incorporate that into their programming, but then that leaves out survivors who don't practice those same religious practices. And so spirituality means much more than that as well. It can mean helping survivors practice and get connected with religious practices that feel healing to them. It can mean getting in touch with and practicing cultural practices that are really meaningful to them. I know Guadalupe, who again, you'll meet in 2 weeks, she often talks about things that are really healing to her as she puts out tobacco or she smudges. Like those things really fill her spirit. Like for me, it's really about being in nature. So that's moving my body in nature, sitting and having conversations in nature, maybe getting my hands in the earth, growing things, like all of that, again, feeling that connection to the higher being, to the earth, to the universe, are all really important things. And that connection to culture, I think, is really important. Again, Olga talks about one of the deepest parts of her healing has happened when her survivorship and her experience, her childhood was when she experienced sexual violence was so deeply connected to her culture. The foods, the smells, the words, the language, because all of that was happening as the sexual violence was happening. And so she disconnected from her culture. So it was very healing for her to be able to make food from her childhood, eat the food from her childhood, speak the language from her childhood, all of those things. So having services that, one, support those cultural practices, help someone explore those things, are also an area for growth. But I do want to mention one thing, especially for those of us who identify as white. We are really good at appropriating cultural practices that are not our own. And so it would be not appropriate for me to do smudging or putting out tobacco. But if Guadalupe invites me into a ceremony and does brushing of the leaves on me, that's okay, because I've been invited into that. But for me and Leah to then lead you all in something like that, that would not be okay. So we're not suggesting that like we all go out and adopt cultural practices, but that aren't our own. But in order to serve survivors from all of our communities, again, that would help us with having staff that reflect the communities that we're serving. Oh, and Leah, great. I was getting ready to mention that and you were thinking about it. Do you want to talk about that, that document?
Sure. This is a resource we created in our rural project to help programs navigate what we know are often really healing practices that are culturally specific, but not culturally appropriating. So in this document, we sort of define what's cultural appropriation, what's cultural appreciation, and then give you some suggestions for ways that you can incorporate folks' culture into their healing process, but not actually appropriate that as a white person at the program or in a program that has predominantly white leadership, a non-culturally specific program, essentially.
Thank you, Leah. So I think, were there other things, do folks have questions or anything that they want to add?
What's coming up for folks as you hear some of this stuff? Do you have thoughts on what's happening at your agency, how difficult it is to implement some of the things they're talking about? Do you need help understanding how to make the connections in your agency? Let's take a moment to hear from you all. Okay, nothing?
Well, we're gonna give you an opportunity to talk with each other later on in this webinar. So maybe you're just a little shy in front of everyone and that's okay. We'll give you an opportunity to connect with each other. But I just wanna be really clear that also we're really open to hearing like, yeah, we know everything you've said and we do this already. Or, any feedback is good. It's gonna help inform this conversation. We wanna be sure that we're chatting about what it is that you need from this conversation right now, not just what we were prepared to say. But before we give you an opportunity to chat with each other, Val, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about the guiding principles of advocacy? I think that might be helpful as we talk about healing.
Yeah, well, and I put a link to the Throw Away the Menu Sadie publication that I'm sure Erica has shared with all of you, but again, just in case I'm putting it in there as well, where a lot of the things that Leah and I are talking about today are explored in a little bit more in depth in that publication as well. And so when we think about advocacy or those guiding principles of advocacy, oftentimes we talk about, and because funders require us to think about it in this way, is advocacy sort of as a service. And that then there's medical advocacy and legal advocacy and personal advocacy or general advocacy. Like we have these labels on them that are really tied to settings. When in reality, how we think about advocacy is it's really a skill set, and it's really an approach that then you apply that skill set and that approach across a variety of settings, so that you can use these are principles for how you set up like your in-person services, your group services, any systems advocacy that you would do as well. Again, it's about helping survivors find answers to their questions, helping survivors identify what healing means to them, and helping them to access those healing options. Advocacy is really rooted in empowerment, is one of the buzzwords that we talk about. And again, that's really about having the foundational belief that survivors know what's best for their own life. They know themselves. They're not broken. We are not broken as survivors. We survived some things that are really traumatic. And our reactions and our responses to those things are normal reactions to sexual violence. And we need help and support in navigating the impacts of that throughout the rest of our life, right? So the things like Leah and I talked about, being connected to our bodies, our physical health, our spirituality, those types of things. But again, the empowerment really helps to give the choice and control back in a survivor's life. Again, I mentioned earlier that one of the most common impacts of sexual violence is that we learn to not trust ourselves. And so really that relationship building with ourselves, knowing and having someone else have faith in that we know what is right for ourselves, we make decisions about our life. So that really empowerment-based, really active listening, validating survivors, all of those skills that, again, Mira and Guadalupe are going to talk a little bit more about, but that really are rooted in empowerment. One of the other guiding principles is around being mobile, is the word that we chose, but really what we mean is about meeting survivors where they are physically at. So instead of expecting survivors to come to our office, for many survivors, that's not possible because of transportation issues. Also, maybe confidentiality issues, maybe where you're located is not somewhere where they feel safe, whatever, all the reasons why survivors might not be able to come to us. So making sure that we are out in the community at places where survivors are already at. So schools, right? Survivors, children, teens are in school, college students are in school. So there's plenty of survivors there, as an example. Another example could be partnering and being present with your substance abuse agencies, because often folks that are really struggling with substance abuse, it is very common for them to also be, in particular, adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So again, just being mobile and out there and meeting survivors where they are already at. Yes, Leah, I was going to ask you to go.
Can I jump in, because Yeah, because mobile means a lot to me, especially since I work with rural programs. And I think to me, I even have an even broader definition of mobile, meaning services where and when and how survivors want them. So yes, go out into your community and find the survivors that are there, but be willing to work with and meet with survivors in whatever way, place, time that it works for them. And so if the survivor really doesn't like coming to your office, it's a transportation barrier, or maybe it's just because it feels kind of awkward and really, really professional and it's a little bit uncomfortable, but they like talking on the phone because they can kind of feel like they have the freedom to say whatever they want and they're not worried about your body language or what your face is doing, or maybe it just feels really nice to walk on a particular trail in their community that just brings them a lot of joy and peace, and so it's easier to have appointments while walking there. Just thinking more broadly about how you connect with people and not not relegating appointments only to officially calling something an advocacy appointment. If you're like in person, sitting across a desk, like looking each other right in the eyeball, like if someone feels best just talking on the phone, or talking while you walk around the block together or whatever, that can be, it's really healing for a survivor to get to have the choice in how and where and in what way they meet or talk with you. And I feel like when I was an advocate, I didn't feel like I had the capacity to make that choice. I'm pretty sure if I'd asked my director, like they would have said yes for me to do a lot of these things, but I never felt like I had the freedom or the creativity or the like ability to ask for some of these things. And I definitely don't think the survivors in front of me felt like they could dictate the way that we had meetings, right? Like I needed to be the one proactively saying like, what feels good for you? I see that you feel uncomfortable here. Your body language is telling me that maybe this isn't the right space for you. Where do you feel best talking? Like, what is a space that makes you feel really like safe and comforted? Is it like literally in your bed underneath the covers? Like, cool, let's talk on the phone while you do that. Or, you know what I mean? Like, I never felt like I never offered that when I was an advocate. And I really, really regret that, because I don't think people in our communities are trained to ask for things like that. You don't ask your doctor if you get to do that. You don't get to ask these other kinds of services, your therapist, like, let's not meet in your office today. Let's go find this trail I really like and like walk around it. Like normally we don't get to ask for those things from the professionals in our lives. So people are definitely not going to ask you for that, even though the answer is like, yes, we can totally accommodate that. I think that's one, maybe if I'm allowed to say, positive thing of the pandemic, is that I think we're all realizing something really different about how we want to do this. I love talking to my therapist on the phone. And I have asked, like, I never want to go back to in-person services. Like, it's uncomfortable. And I feel like when I talk on the phone, I gotta feel like I'm talking to my friend on the phone and in my space where I feel comfortable, and like my cat on my lap. And like, I can get into some juicy conversations here that we could never get to in the office. Right. So like, that's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Leah, and that one of the things I've been trying to encourage programs to do is really tap into the skills we have now learned because of the pandemic, of flexibility and curiosity, and really changing the entire way that we've thought about providing services in the past. Right? We've had to figure it out. We've had to be flexible and to be creative, right? And so we can really tap into those skills that we've been using for the last year to, again, create these meaningful services beyond the pandemic as well. So, yeah. I was also thinking as you were talking just about, and maybe this is off topic a little bit, but again, exploring more of this mobile, there's many reasons why survivors would never come to us or even name that they would need a rape crisis center, right? Or a sexual assault program, or a domestic, maybe they only think of your organization as a domestic violence program because they don't want to label themselves like that as needing those services. And so again, it's up to us for how we market and do outreach of what our services are. And again, about being willing to meet in other places other than our offices. as well. Might help, again, like this adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse who wants to really heal their spirituality. Again, is coming to your office and sitting across from you, or maybe a Zoom or whatever is better for them, or maybe a walk in nature or something. So again, just exercising those flexibility and creativity muscles that we've been using.
Totally. And I feel like, not to just really dive deep on this mobile point that we're trying to make, but you made me think also that like, I don't, if a survivor is struggling to make like a formal appointment, even if it's during COVID and that formal appointment is a Zoom where they get to be at home, or a phone call or whatever, where they don't have to leave their space and they don't have to go in, still there's something that feels really formal and like a little bit scary and like anxiety producing about scheduling a specific appointment to talk to someone. And so I think, to me, this like expansive definition that we've got going on of like being mobile, to me, is also being open to the fact that your 24-hour phone line is not just for like crisis, someone's going to hurt me right now, I need physical safety immediately, but that like someone can call your line whenever it is that something pops up for them in their life, and that they don't need to make formal appointments and make like a specific formalized connection with one particular advocate that they always go to. That like, if it's working for that person, that there's no specific person assigned to work with them, or that they're building a relationship with at your program, that they just call it when it's 2 p.m, or if it's 4 a.m, or if it's a Tuesday, or if it's for like a Sunday night, that whenever it is that in their life something's coming up and they need to talk to someone, that like that's okay to do. Because I talked to a lot of programs that feel, or certainly when I was an advocate, there was this like anxiety that if someone called several times, it was like, well, we need to get them in for in-person services. We need to schedule an appointment with them. Like that somehow it wasn't okay that they were just calling and getting their needs met whenever and however they needed to meet them. And so that's, I think, to me, and it continuing to expand this definition of mobile means just like you're reachable and whatever and however the person needs to be reached.
Yeah, wonderful, Leah. I'm looking at our time a little bit, and I just want to pause for a minute to see if there are more, if anyone thought of questions or had any thoughts that they wanted to share with the whole group before we move into a little bit of an activity.
And you can type in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and say it out loud, or you can just be really quiet, whatever it is that you're feeling today.
Because Leah and I can talk. So.
2 days after the time change, I get it. Like, you're all doing great just for showing up, honestly.
Okay, well, one of the things that Leah and I were thinking about doing today is a breathing activity, and for a variety of different reasons. One is because oftentimes when we're thinking about making these big, shifts in how we think about our work and organizational changes, that raises anxiety often in us, or worry or stress. The times in which we are living with multiple pandemics happening, that we're already in this heightened state, right? So those of us who are survivors of sexual violence always need this help of reconnecting with our bodies. When we're advocates, right, and we need to be able to be like we're stressed out as advocates, right, and our anxiety and our crisis response is always elevated, and if we need to be able to be present, right, with survivors, we need to practice having our neurology, what it's like, our neurology, like our brains, like are sort of like, and so we need to help calm them down. I am not a licensed therapist or a psychologist, so I'm not even going to pretend to use the right words. So these are skills you can use for yourself And these are skills that then you can teach the survivors that you're working with. Again, that is one way to help your services be more healing focused, is by helping survivors do exercises like a breathing activity. And so we thought we'd spend just a couple of minutes on a breathing activity. And unlike Taylor, who was here with me a couple of weeks ago, I am not used to leading activities like this, so I apologize if it's a little bit awkward, because that's Val. So this is
Val, we believe in you.
So this breathing exercise is called 4-4-8 breathing. And again, this is a great activity to do when you're feeling stressed or tense, because it helps to calm the nervous system and clear the head of distractions and reduce stress. So I stand at my desk. I don't know how many of you all are standing, but if you feel comfortable and if you have the opportunity to sit, this activity is often best done when you're seated. Okay, so I'll kind of read the instructions and then we can practice it together as well. So while sitting, it's breathe through your nose and count to 4, taking the breath into your stomach. And then we're going to hold our breath for a count of 4. So that's the 4-4. And then we're going to release our breath through our mouth, making a sound. So if you want to be on mute, because if you're embarrassed about making sounds, perfect. And then you exhale through your mouth, making that whooshing noise for a count of 8. And then without taking a breath, breathe in again for the count of 4, holding for 4, and then counting out for 8. And we'll do that a few times. Oh, sorry, Leah.
Can we get you're okay. Can we get an example of the whooshing noise?
Sure. So I have to like breathe in. So so again, this is, the instructions are also like count actually in your head, like focus on counting. So breathe in through your nose for a count of 4. Hold for 4. Right? So that's the noise for a count of 8, right? So let's all do that 3 times, okay? And everybody can do their own counting, because I can't count for you all out loud and do the breathing activity. So again, breathing in through your nose for the count of 4, holding for a count of 4, and then exhaling for a count of 8. So let's do it 3 times.
I definitely did not scare the cats in my house with my whooshing noise.
And again, like for me, this takes practice and intention. Again, because of that mind-body disconnect, like I just want to breathe and I want to really do it fast. And again, in our work, that's one of the skills that I think as advocates and TA people and coalition staff and leaders in our organizations, we're always in a hurry because there's so much work to do, that feeling like we can just take a few seconds to slow down and breathe is a luxury oftentimes in our work. And so it takes a lot of practice to actually count, for me anyway, to actually do the counting to 4, holding for 4. And then I really like the breathing out for 8. It takes a lot of practice. And so doing it will help us get to there and have that connection. And so again, easy for us to do for a few seconds throughout our day, and to then teach to survivors that they can use when they're feeling anxious or stressed as well. So Leah, I think what we were going to ask folks to do is go to breakout rooms to have some conversations with each other. Leah and I have some questions that we thought you could explore, but really our purpose for going to the breakout rooms is to help you all build connections with each other. Because again, that's what we talked about, that healing is about building connection, having meaningful services is about connection. And in our work, we are often isolated within our program from other programs, from other advocates, right? Other folks who do this work. But then the pandemic, right, has really isolated us. So having opportunity for you all to build connection with each other only will help support you and your work with survivors, and as you work on making organizational changes in order to create these meaningful services. So Leah, did you put the questions? I knew you would. You put the questions in the chat. Didn't you?
I did, yes.
Okay.
Once again, they're just jumping off points for folks.
Yeah, so talk about whatever you want, right?
Yep. And then I think Erica is assigning folks to breakout rooms. And so I think, does 15 minutes work?
Yeah, let's do, I think we have a small number of folks, so hopefully you can chat in 15 minutes, get to know each other.
And we'll let you know when to come back. And you should still have access to the chat box in your breakout room, so you should still be able to see those questions.
We have like 12 folks, Erica. So to have like 3 folks in a room, let's do like 4 rooms. Okay. And then we can always move folks around if that doesn't really work.
Do we know if the phone number that called in is connected to one of these accounts?
It might be. It's mine.
So that person might be alone in their room, or they might be split between 2 rooms. Do you want me to join group 4?
No, I think if I'm not, well, I don't know, but last time that number was Camilla. And
okay.
Now the number and Camilla are in
Are
there.
both there. Okay. Perfect.
Well, how rude. I'm trying to send, well, because I can't. Let me try.
Maybe you're fixing this. I don't want to get in the way, but person that's listed as she, her, hers, have you tried calling in? In the bottom of your screen, there's a black bar with a bunch of options. And if you click next to the like microphone mute button, you can switch to phone audio and it'll give you a phone number to call in. So that way you can use the phone as audio and we can assign you to a room. I think are Tabitha and Brittany new to this meeting? Do they need to be assigned? Are you
Yeah.
coming? Okay. I think I'm gonna hop around to different rooms and just make sure everything's going okay. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. It looks like room 3 is having a great conversation. Room 1 it has come back. There we go. Because I think they're having some technical difficulties able to talk with one another. So we have a couple more minutes left together. I don't know if anyone that was in that room that liked to continue to have the conversation, we can have it in here, or if there's any other questions that you have or points you want to follow up on, or anything at all, you can write it in the chat box, or if you do have the ability to unmute yourself, you can do that, but welcome to just include it in the chat box and we can chat more. Or if any of you would like to be assigned to the other room, it seems like they're doing good, having a good conversation. So if you would like to be in their room, we can reassign you. I know it's really hard when you can't unmute yourself to have a conversation. Okay. Well, I'm glad you all wound up in the same group then. Girl, you really gotta change that smoke detector battery. I think the last time we smoked, you still had not changed the smoke detector battery.
I literally left to see if that was at my house.
That's what I did the last time I talked to Erica. Because it does kind of strangely reverberate and kind of sound like it's in my own house.
Sorry, guys. Listen, that's so bad. I've gotten so used to it. I don't even hear it. Other folks hear that and they're like, don't forget shit. I'm like, crap, yeah. And every time I go out of here, I forget the battery. Forget it.
That's okay. I'm going to mail you some batteries.
Right. Oh my God, I keep forgetting.
I feel like I do that all the time with stuff. Like as soon as it's not actively bothering you in the moment, you just like fully forget that it exists. And then as soon as you come back, you're like, how did I forget that?
Right.
How do you sleep with it though? That's what I can't imagine.
You don't notice it anymore, right, Erica?
Yeah. It's a pretty good illustration of dissociation and our ability to just put things out of our minds.
Yeah, I don't even notice it anymore. Very seldomly does like the sound come and I'm like, oh, okay. But I don't know. I've tuned it out maybe.
I tried to edit it out of our recorded conversation with Fatima as much as I could, but there were a couple of times when it's in there.
Oh my God, I forgot all about that. Oh no.
It's okay. It was a great conversation.
Oh no. Yeah, I gotta get that battery.
I think you're literally not the only one. I'm pretty sure there was at least one other video where you can hear a smoke detector in the background. Oh,
we're so bad with this. Okay. Well, you want to bring everybody back into the space?
yeah, I think so. Maybe give like a 1 minute warning or something so they can wrap up their conversation.
It usually automatically gives a 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, how do you do that?
Oh, there you go. 1 minute.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back.
Does anybody have anything that they want to share that happened in their conversation? Any questions that came up? Really, this is just an opportunity for you to share any questions or any comments. It doesn't look like anybody has questions or wanting to share, Leah. So do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I don't think I have like strong final thoughts other than I'm so glad that you all joined. And that I hope you're joining for this whole series because we're gonna have some really cool conversations the next two. I'm gonna put my email in the chat box. Please email me for anything that you need. If there was something that you wanted that we mentioned in this that you want to like dive deeper into or talk about as it relates to your specific program or your specific community. If you have any questions about rural sexual assault services, literally anything at all, that is my whole job. I would be so happy to chat with you and just talk more about your program in your community and figure things out together. And then in about 35 minutes, I host a monthly space for rural advocates to get together and just talk about what's going on in their programs in their communities. People bring questions about specific survivors they're working with or things that are coming up in their community. It started during COVID as we all sort of were scrambling and navigating services differently together. And it's just evolved into like a lovely supportive space where people ask questions and you get to hear not just from me, but from like other rural folks around the country and their wisdom and their expertise. So that our monthly call happens to fall today. So if you would like to join, that's in about 35 minutes. And here's the Zoom link below. If for any reason you have problems with it, you can always email me at the email above. But I really enjoyed getting to spend time with you all today. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you want to talk more about this, because this was truly the tip of the iceberg of the things that Val and I talk about all day.
Yeah. Thanks, Leah. Yeah, and I just wanted to, again, thank everybody for their time. Again, I love talking about this stuff. So any questions or any support you might want from Elevate Uplift, don't hesitate. You can reach out to me. I put my contact information in the chat as well. And of course, ask Erica and she can support you as well, or she can connect you with us and we'll all work together to get you the support that you need. And so I'm so grateful for all of you and for all the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you both for all the great information. Thank you, Leah, and thank you, Valerie, for taking the time to join us and have this really candid conversation and just talk about all the things. And like Valerie mentioned, I am absolutely willing to individually work with you or your agencies to come up with specific plans that are relevant to you or where you are in your agency. I am going to now turn it over to our training specialist, Alexandra Smith, to talk about all the logistics and the things that you want access to, certificates and surveys and things of that nature. Alexandra?
Yeah, thanks, Erica. So I dropped the link in the chat to our evaluation form, and we would love it if you could fill this out. We use this information to kind of help shape our trainings in the future, so we really appreciate any feedback you have for us. Additionally, this evaluation form is required to receive your certificate, which will be sent out at the end of the series. And after this webinar ends today, our recording of the training will be available on YouTube and on Coalition Manager if you ever want to look back and refer to that. So yeah, I think that's all for me.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. We will see you again in 2 weeks for the next one in the series. So not this Tuesday coming, but the following Tuesday.
So
And
underneath on the
thank
survey,
you.
underneath training name, what are we supposed to put?
Throwing away the menu.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem, Tashika. I'm going to stop recording. Leah, can you stay on for a hot second?
Yes.